It was a quiet day on Earth, one like any other. The sun was shining brightly, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new season. Humans went about their lives, unaware that this peaceful day would be the beginning of a momentous event in their history. In the vastness of space, something was moving. A massive alien fleet was making its way towards Earth, but the inhabitants of this planet had no idea that they were about to face an unimaginable threat. The aliens were from a distant star system, far beyond the reaches of human technology. Their race, known as the Zorvans, had encountered many civilizations across the galaxy, and they were convinced that they had seen everything. They had encountered powerful species, cunning warriors, and advanced technology. However, nothing had prepared them for what they would find on Earth. As the Zorvan fleet approached, their ships began to scan the planet from orbit. Their sensors were advanced, capable of detecting any sign of life, technology, or threats. But what they found was both amusing and baffling. Earth, in their eyes, was a primitive planet. The humans had barely scratched the surface of space travel. Their cities were small, their technology outdated, and their military was nothing more than a few makeshift defenses scattered across the world. These humans are nothing more than a curiosity. The Zorvan fleet commander, Harg, muttered as he observed the planet through the main viewport of his flagship. Their weapons are obsolete, their ships laughable. This will be an easy conquest. Xargar was an experienced commander, having led successful campaigns across dozens of worlds. He had crushed mighty empires and left them in ruin. The Zorvans were an advanced race, and their technology far surpassed anything humanity had ever dreamed of. In Xargar's mind, Earth was no different from any other world that had fallen under his fleet's might. But something about Earth caught his attention. There was a strange energy reading coming from deep within the planet. It was faint, almost undetectable, but it was there. Xargar tapped the console in front of him, enlarging the reading on the screen. It didn't make sense. The humans had no energy sources that could produce this kind of signature. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. He felt a small twinge of curiosity, but quickly dismissed it. It was probably just a natural anomaly. Earth was full of oddities, after all. With a cold smile, Xargar turned to his crew. "Prepare the invasion fleet. We strike at dawn." Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, life went on as usual. The news was filled with reports of small, unexplained incidents, strange weather patterns, unusual seismic activity, and mysterious satellite malfunctions. But most people dismissed these reports as nothing more than coincidences. Little did they know, these were the first signs of the coming storm. In a small underground bunker located in the mountains, a group of scientists was working on an unusual project. Dr. Evelyn Carson, a leading scientist in the field of archaeology and ancient technologies, was one of the few humans who had recently discovered something that could change the course of history. For months, she had been studying old records and artifacts, piecing together evidence of a long-forgotten warship hidden deep beneath Earth's surface. She had always suspected that Earth's history was far more complex than anyone realized, but the discovery she was about to make would be beyond anything she could have imagined. The day the aliens arrived, Dr. Carson and her team had been digging deep into the mountainside, following ancient maps that hinted at the location of the mysterious ship. They had been working tirelessly, unaware that their digging would lead them to something that would shake the very foundation of human understanding. As they uncovered the first signs of the ship's exterior, a strange hum filled the air, as if the Earth itself was vibrating in response to their actions. The team paused, puzzled. "What was that?" one of the workers asked, looking around nervously. "I don't know, but keep going," Dr. Carson replied, her voice steady but her heart racing with excitement. She had always believed that there was more to Earth's past than met the eye. The idea of uncovering a hidden relic from humanity's forgotten history thrilled her, but she had no idea that it would soon become the key to humanity's survival. Little did they know, the alien fleet was already descending toward Earth, Their sensors locked on their target. They had no reason to suspect the humans had any hidden weapons. The Zorvans saw themselves as conquerors, and Earth was nothing more than another prize to be claimed. As the Zorvans made their descent toward Earth's surface, their leader, Hargar, gave the order to begin the invasion. The first wave of ships fired their weapons, launching bombs and missiles toward Earth's surface, preparing to devastate the planet. But as the first explosions rocked the surface of the planet, something unexpected happened. The strange energy signature that had been detected earlier suddenly spiked. The ground trembled, and an ancient power began to awaken beneath the Earth. It was the first sign that Earth had something far more dangerous than anyone had realized, a secret that even the mighty Zorvans had overlooked. The relic that had been buried for centuries was not just any warship. It was an ancient weapon, built by a long-lost civilization, a weapon of unimaginable power. And it was about to make itself known. As the Zorvans continued their assault on Earth, they were unaware that the very thing they had dismissed as a relic was about to become their worst nightmare. The stage was set, and the war for Earth had begun. The first wave of Zorvan bombardment had shaken the Earth. Cities in the northern hemisphere had barely had time to react before their defenses crumbled beneath the sheer force of the alien weaponry. Earth's greatest powers, nations, alliances, military forces, were all caught off guard. No one had anticipated this. No one knew what to do when the skies filled with the light of destruction. The world's leaders scrambled to defend their people, but they were already outmatched. The invasion seemed inevitable. But deep beneath the surface, hidden away for millennia, something was stirring. The underground site in the mountains, where Dr. Carson and her team had been working, was beginning to hum with an unnatural energy. The artifacts they had uncovered had long been thought to be nothing more than relics, old, dusty pieces of a forgotten age. But the ancient warship, the one they had only just begun to reveal, was not just a piece of history. It was alive. Dr. Carson stood in the chamber, her eyes wide as the floor beneath her feet trembled. She wasn't sure what was happening, but the temperature in the room had suddenly dropped, and the walls seemed to pulse with energy. The large structure they had uncovered, once just a shadow of a long-forgotten past, now seemed to breathe. The once dormant systems within it began to light up, faint flickers of blue light tracing along the ship's walls. What is happening? One of the scientists whispered, stepping back. He was visibly shaken by the change in the air, the eerie feeling that had taken over the room. Dr. Carson couldn't answer. She watched in awe as the ship's panels began to shift. It was as if the relic had sensed the invasion, its dormant systems responding to an external force. Slowly, she approached the central control area, where a massive console lay half-buried under centuries of dust and debris. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact, a wave of energy surged through her, and the ship's systems began to hum louder. Suddenly, a screen flickered to life, casting a cold, blue light over the room. Symbols and strange markings filled the screen, ones she didn't recognize, but the language seemed to resonate with something deep within her. "Dr. Carson," one of the technicians shouted from behind her. He was pointing at the screen. "Look." On the monitor, a map of Earth appeared, dotted with strange, glowing red marks. But it wasn't just any map. It was a map of Earth from centuries ago, a time long before any of the current civilizations existed. The locations were familiar in their own way, but many were ancient, lost to history, and buried under layers of time. The relic wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal. "Is this a blueprint?" Carson murmured, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. The map was showing areas of the Earth that had been forgotten, places no one had dared to search. But what it didn't show, or perhaps what it couldn't show, was the force of destruction that was now sweeping the surface of the planet. Outside, the world was burning. Zorvan warships hovered above the cities, their weapons raining down devastation. Alien soldiers poured onto the ground, striking terror into every heart they touched. The invasion was no longer a question of if, it was happening now. But the humans on the surface had no idea that their salvation might lie beneath their feet. Carson watched as the ship's systems continued to come online, the energy readings spiking higher and higher. She didn't understand all of it, but she could sense one thing for sure. Whatever the ship was, whatever it had been built to do, it was powerful. It had the potential to change everything. "Can you control it?" one of the scientists asked, his voice shaking. "We need to do something." Carson didn't respond immediately. Her mind raced. She didn't know how, but she felt as if the ship was somehow waiting for her. It was as if it recognized her, or perhaps it was responding to a genetic code deep within her. The thought was absurd. There was no way. But there it was. She stepped forward again, this time with purpose, and her fingers flew over the ancient controls. A loud hiss echoed through the room as the massive warship systems began to activate. The underground chamber trembled, and then the ship began to rise. The floor beneath their feet shifted as if the earth itself was opening up to release the ship from its ancient prison. The walls began to crack as the immense power of the ship began to flood into the area, pulling the vessel from its resting place deep within the mountains. The team stared in disbelief as the ship, which had once seemed like nothing more than a relic of a forgotten age, now rose into the air. Carson's heart raced as she realized the full extent of what was happening. The ship was awakening. Back on the surface, the Zorvans continued their assault, unaware that the very weapon they had dismissed was now rising to meet them. The tide of battle had begun to shift, but no one knew how or when the human warship would strike. In that moment, Carson made a decision. She couldn't control this ship completely, not yet. But it didn't matter. They had to try. She gave the command to the control panel, and the warship's weapon systems began to charge. Above them, the skies darkened, and a beam of bright light shot up from the earth, piercing the sky. The Zorvans, still focused on their destruction, did not see it coming. The first strike. The warship rose from its hidden chamber beneath the mountains, its colossal structure stretching into the sky. The ground shook violently as it soared, as if the very earth was groaning under the weight of its awakening. The team watched in awe, a mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes. They had known the ship was powerful, but witnessing it rise, fully operational, left them breathless. Dr. Carson stood at the control panel, her heart pounding in her chest. The ship was more than a relic. It was a weapon. And it was responding to her. Somehow, it was responding to her. "All systems are online," one of the technicians said, his voice shaking. "Weapons systems activated. Energy levels off the charts." Carson didn't take her eyes off the screen in front of her. The map displayed on it was no longer a record of ancient Earth. It had shifted. It was now showing the position of the Zorvan invasion fleet. The red dots were everywhere, signaling the enemy ships that hovered over Earth's major cities, launching their brutal attacks. She knew they had no time to waste. The Zorvans were relentless, and humanity's survival hung in the balance. "Prepare for launch," Carson commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding outside. "This is our only shot." The ship's hull vibrated with power as it began to move, inching toward the sky. The first few moments were slow, almost agonizingly so. Carson's mind raced. She had no idea what would happen when they finally reached the Zorvan fleet. She had no idea if the ship's weapons would even work. But she couldn't afford to waste any more time. Earth's defenses had been crushed, and the only hope now was this ship. The team scrambled to monitor the warship's energy readings. The controls had been designed for an ancient civilization, one far more advanced than humanity, and they were struggling to adapt. But it didn't matter. The ship was alive now, and it would follow their commands, whether they understood it fully or not. "Warning, Zorvan fleet detected." A robotic voice echoed through the ship's communication system. It was cold and mechanical, but its message was clear. The enemy was coming. And then, for the first time, humanity's weapon made its move. A deafening roar echoed as the warship's engines ignited, launching it into the air with incredible speed. The alien forces hovering over Earth didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that the planet they had underestimated had a weapon of its own, a weapon so old, so powerful, that it could turn the tide of the battle in a matter of moments. "Lock on target," Carson instructed, her voice now filled with determination. The warship's targeting systems came to life, locking onto the Zorvan ships with deadly precision. The crew watched the screen as the ship's weapon systems calibrated, and a powerful beam of energy gathered at the front of the ship. The air around the warship crackled with power, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the beam fired. A blinding flash of light erupted from the warship's bow, cutting through the atmosphere with unimaginable force. The beam streaked through the sky, tearing apart the alien ships above. The Zorvans had no time to react, and their craft exploded in violent flashes of green and blue light, the remnants of their technology disintegrating in midair. For a few seconds, there was silence. The shock of the first strike echoed through the entire fleet, and then chaos erupted. The remaining Zorvan ships regrouped, but the damage had already been done. Half of their fleet had been obliterated in a single devastating attack, and humanity had done it. Dr. Carson watched in stunned silence as the warship soared above the destruction. The crew was still trying to process what had just happened, but Carson knew they couldn't stop now. The Zorvans were still there. The battle wasn't over. "We've just made a dent," Carson said, her voice tense. "But we can't afford to wait. We need to hit them again. We need to show them that they made a mistake underestimating Earth." The warship's engines hummed as it changed course, diving back toward the remaining Zorvan fleet. Carson felt a wave of adrenaline rush through her. This was it, the moment humanity had been waiting for. They were no longer the victims. They were now the predators. "We're not done yet," Carson said with a grim smile, looking toward the rest of the team. "We're going to make them regret ever landing here." The warship continued its ascent, leaving the charred remains of the destroyed Zorvan ships behind. It was only the beginning. And Carson knew, deep in her bones, that the coming battle would change everything. The humans had only just awakened the full power of the warship, and now they would unleash it in ways the Zorvans couldn't possibly predict. The alien response. The Zorvan fleet had been rocked to its core by humanity's sudden and terrifying strike. Half of their warships had been obliterated in a single blow, and the surviving Zorvans now scrambled to regroup, re-establish their formation, and recover from the shock. It was a staggering turn of events, one they had not anticipated. On the warship, Dr. Carson stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the chaotic scene unfolding on the view screen. The Zorvans were circling like sharks, regrouping and preparing for retaliation. But Carson was confident. For the first time, Earth held the upper hand. "Status report," Carson ordered, her voice calm but sharp. She needed to know their next move. They couldn't afford to hesitate now. "The remaining Zorvan ships are attempting to realign their formation, Mom," one of the technicians reported. "But their fleet is severely damaged. Their morale is down. They're hesitating." Carson nodded. She could feel it in her bones. The fear, the uncertainty. The Zorvans hadn't expected humans to be able to retaliate like this, especially not with a weapon as powerful as the one they had just unleashed. But there was no time to celebrate. The alien fleet was gathering itself, and the warship had only a limited window to strike again. The humans had caught the Zorvans off guard once, but they would learn quickly. The next move had to count. "We need to press the attack," Carson said, her voice steady. "Don't give them time to recover." The warship's engines roared to life as it surged forward, cutting through the atmosphere at incredible speeds. The energy from the first strike was still pulsing through its systems, and Carson knew it wouldn't last forever. But she didn't need it to. They only needed one more strike, one more blow to show the Zorvans that their invasion had been a grave mistake. As they neared the enemy fleet, Carson looked out at the approaching Zorvan ships. They were regrouping, but something was off. There was an odd, almost unnatural stillness to their movements. It was as if they were waiting for something, preparing for a counterattack. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the warship's comm system, breaking the tension in the air. "This is Zorvan Command." The voice boomed, cold and emotionless. "You are fools. You have no idea what you've just unleashed." Carson's heart skipped a beat. The Zorvans had spoken, and they were not backing down. "You will regret this," the voice continued, a trace of menace creeping into its tone. "You have awoken something far worse than you know. The warship you control is not your salvation. It is your doom." Dr. Carson's grip tightened on the armrest of her seat. The Zorvans had always been ruthless, but now they were resorting to threats. The Zorvans didn't understand. They didn't realize that humans were not the weak species they thought they were. Humanity had endured countless challenges throughout history. A threat like this, an invasion from beyond the stars, was nothing compared to the horrors they had faced before. "We'll see about that," Carson muttered under her breath, narrowing her eyes. She turned to her crew, who were watching her, waiting for her orders. "Prepare for another strike. Full power to the forward cannons. Target their command ship." As the warship approached, the Zorvans seemed to hesitate. It was as if they were unsure of how to respond. But then, in a sudden flash of blinding light, the Zorvan ships came alive. A barrage of energy blasts erupted from the alien fleet, cutting through the sky in a deadly rain of destruction. The warship's shields flared as the first few blasts collided with its force fields, sending shockwaves through the ship. But the warship held firm. The ancient ship's defenses were unlike anything the Zorvans had ever encountered. Their weapons bounced off the shields, failing to penetrate the thick armor of humanity's last hope. "Shields holding," the technician called out, his voice tense. "They're not getting through." Carson smiled, though her expression remained stoic. The Zorvans had underestimated the power of this ship, this relic of a forgotten time. But that mistake would cost them dearly. "Return fire," Carson commanded, her voice unwavering. "It's time to show them that they are the ones who should fear." The warship's cannons erupted with devastating force, launching another deadly beam toward the Zorvan command ship. The beam struck with pinpoint accuracy, cutting through the heart of the Zorvan vessel. The ship shuddered under the impact, its shields collapsing as the energy beam tore through its hull. The Zorvan ship began to break apart, its structure disintegrating in a violent explosion. The remaining Zorvan fleet reeled in shock. They had lost their command ship, their leadership, and their focus. The remnants of the Zorvan forces scattered in every direction, trying desperately to escape. But it was too late. The Zorvans had been beaten back once again. Carson let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The first major battle had been won, but the war was far from over. She knew the Zorvans would regroup, that they wouldn't give up so easily. But humanity had sent a clear message. Earth was no longer defenseless. The warship hovered above the battlefield, its engines powering down as the Zorvan fleet fled in disarray. Dr. Carson allowed herself a moment of triumph, but her mind was already turning toward the next phase of the battle. "They're not gone yet," Carson said, her voice sharp. "Prepare for the next attack. They'll be back." The war had only just begun. The Zorvan counterattack. The victory over the Zorvans was just the beginning. Dr. Carson knew that the alien invaders wouldn't back down so easily. In the aftermath of their defeat, the Zorvan fleet was licking its wounds, but they weren't finished. They would regroup, strategize, and return. And when they did, they would be more prepared, more dangerous. Humanity had to be ready for the next wave. In the warship's command center, tension was thick in the air. The crew worked tirelessly, keeping their eyes on the radar, analyzing every flicker of movement. The view screen showed the aftermath of the battle, the debris of destroyed Zorvan ships floating in space, remnants of the failed invasion. But even as they celebrated the victory, they knew that danger was still looming. How long until their next fleet arrives? Dr. Carson asked, her voice low but firm as she looked at the crew member in charge of intelligence. "Based on our scans, it won't be long," the officer replied, his fingers moving swiftly across the controls. "They've already begun to regroup. A new fleet is on its way. They're bringing in reinforcements from nearby sectors." Carson's heart sank. She had hoped for a longer reprieve, but the Zorvans were relentless. Their forces were vast, and this warship, though powerful, was only one ship. They needed more. "Prepare the ship for a prolonged engagement," Carson ordered, her voice hardening. "We'll need to hold them off as long as possible. Get us in position to launch another counterstrike." The crew sprang into action, their faces a mixture of determination and concern. The warship was a marvel of human ingenuity, but even it had its limits. They couldn't afford to waste their remaining resources or risk overextending. Earth's survival depended on the ship's ability to remain operational long enough to fend off the next Zorvan onslaught. Outside, in the cold vacuum of space, the silence was deafening. But within the warship, there was an almost palpable sense of urgency. Carson knew the next battle would be unlike the first. The Zorvans had underestimated humanity before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The Zorvan fleet soon came into view, far larger than before. Thousands of ships were coming at them, swarming the battlefield like a hive of angry bees. They were moving in perfect formation, a coordinated attack, a clear sign that they had learned from their earlier mistakes. Carson's grip tightened on the armrest of her seat. The enemy was preparing for a decisive blow. They weren't just coming to conquer Earth anymore. They were coming to destroy everything humanity had built. This wasn't a war for resources. This was a war for survival. "Braced for impact," Carson said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of what was to come. The warship's engines roared to life as it accelerated toward the oncoming Zorvan fleet. The first wave of enemy ships opened fire, their energy blasts lighting up the vast emptiness of space. The warship's shields flared, absorbing the initial barrage, but Carson knew it wouldn't hold forever. The Zorvans had brought bigger guns this time, stronger weapons. "Shields are at 75%, the technician reported, his voice strained. "We can't keep this up for long." Carson nodded. The ship's shields would only hold so much, and the Zorvans were targeting their weak points, where the ship's defenses were less advanced. The enemy was adapting quickly, learning from their mistakes. "Prepare to launch counterattacks," Carson ordered, her voice sharp. "We need to hit them before they can break through our defenses." As the warship raced toward the Zorvan fleet, Carson's mind raced too. She knew they couldn't afford to retreat. The warship was humanity's last line of defense. But what if it wasn't enough? What if they couldn't stop the Zorvans this time? The first blast from the Zorvans struck the warship's left side, sending a violent tremor through the ship. Sparks flew from the control panels, and alarms blared throughout the command center. The warship shook violently as the shields absorbed the blow, but the ship's hull was intact. "For now." "We've taken damage," the officer called out. "Hull integrity at 87%. They've breached the outer layer of shields." "Return fire," Carson commanded immediately. "Target their lead ships. We need to break their formation." The warship fired back, unleashing its full arsenal. The energy blasts tore through the Zorvan fleet, striking enemy ships with devastating precision. The warship's targeting systems were flawless, hitting key points in the enemy vessels that caused explosions and scattered debris in their wake. But even as the warship launched its attack, the Zorvans were relentless. They had anticipated humanity's counterattack, and they were ready. More enemy ships closed in, surrounding the warship from all sides. "Incoming," the technician shouted. "We're surrounded, Captain. They've closed in too fast." The crew worked feverishly to keep the ship operational, but it was clear they were being overwhelmed. The Zorvans were relentless. They weren't just trying to defeat the warship. They were trying to annihilate humanity's will to fight. Carson's mind raced. She knew Earth's survival depended on this battle. The warship was humanity's hope, But without more support, they couldn't keep fighting forever. Earth needed a miracle. And then, just as it seemed like the warship was on the verge of destruction, Carson saw something. Through the smoke and chaos, a group of human reinforcements appeared. Dozens of ships, flying in formation, broke through the Zorvan lines. It was humanity's greatest weapon, the sheer force of numbers. "Reinforcements," Carson shouted, her voice filled with relief. "We've got backup." The reinforcements arrived in full force, catching the Zorvans off guard. The battle had turned, and the warship wasn't alone anymore. The Zorvans, seeing the tide turning, hesitated. They hadn't expected Earth to be able to mobilize so quickly, to rally their forces in such a short amount of time. Now the Zorvans were outnumbered, and they knew it. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. Humanity had proven once again that it would not go down without a fight. And this time, the Zorvans would feel the full force of Earth's wrath. The final stand. The tide had shifted, but the battle was far from over. The Zorvans, still reeling from the unexpected arrival of human reinforcements, regrouped, their ships now scattered and disorganized. For the first time, they were facing something they had not anticipated: humanity's refusal to surrender. Dr. Carson, standing in the command center of the warship, watched as her crew prepared for the final phase of the battle. The reinforcements were in position, flanking the remaining Zorvan ships. But Carson knew the Zorvans would not retreat without one last, all-out assault. "Captain, we're outnumbered in terms of firepower," one of the crew members said, his voice tight with stress. "We may have more ships now, but their fleet is still formidable. They're preparing for a major offensive." Carson didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted to the tactical display. The Zorvans had formed a defensive circle around their command ship, likely to protect their leader and preserve their remaining power. This was their final stand, and Carson knew it would be the fight of a lifetime. "We'll need to hit them with everything we've got," Carson said at last. "No more holding back. Get the fleet ready for a full assault." As the orders were given, the crew worked with an intensity that could only come from understanding what was at stake. Carson felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but there was no turning back. The warship was humanity's last hope, and she couldn't afford to let it fall now. Outside, the battle raged on. The Zorvan ships, though battered, fired relentlessly at the reinforcements, trying to maintain their stronghold. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as each side exchanged fire. For a moment, it seemed as though the battle would end in a stalemate, neither side willing to give ground. But Carson had a plan. She knew the Zorvans would be vulnerable in one key area: their command ship. If they could take it down, the rest of the fleet would fall into disarray. The Zorvans would lose their leadership, and without it, their organized assault would crumble. "Concentrate all fire on the command ship," Carson commanded, her voice firm. "We end this now." Her crew sprang into action, directing every weapon in their arsenal toward the Zorvan flagship. Missiles, laser blasts, and energy weapons were unleashed, streaking toward their target. The Zorvan command ship, though heavily shielded, began to shake under the force of the attack. But the Zorvans weren't going to give up easily. The flagship retaliated, firing back with everything it had. Energy beams and missiles tore through the void, hitting the warship's shields and sending tremors through its hull. Sparks flew from the control panels as the ship's systems struggled to keep up with the onslaught. "Shields at 40%, the technician called out, his voice filled with urgency. "We're losing power." Carson gritted her teeth. The Zorvans were determined to go down fighting, but so was humanity. "We'll hold the line," Carson said, her voice steely. "We've come too far to let them win now." The warship surged forward, dodging Zorvan fire as it closed the gap with their command ship. The Zorvans attempted to put up a final defense, but humanity's resolve was too strong. The warship's weapons locked onto their target, and in one final devastating barrage, the Zorvan command ship exploded in a massive burst of light. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through the Zorvan fleet, throwing their ships into chaos. Without their leader, the once unified fleet splintered, and the remaining Zorvans turned and fled, retreating into the far reaches of space. "We did it," a crew member whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." But Carson's gaze never wavered. She knew that the war was far from over. The Zorvans would lick their wounds and come back, but for now, humanity had won the day. The warship, battered but victorious, drifted in the wake of the battle, a symbol of humanity's strength and resilience. In the aftermath of the fight, the crew took a moment to breathe. The battle had been long, and many had been lost, but they had stood their ground. Humanity had faced the Zorvans and emerged victorious, not because they were the most powerful, but because they refused to be broken. Dr. Carson walked through the warship's corridors, feeling the weight of the victory settle over her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about something greater. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and the Zorvans would remember this day for the rest of their lives. "Captain," one of the officers said as she entered the command center, "we've received a transmission. It's from Earth." Carson nodded and took a seat at the communication console. The screen flickered to life, and a familiar face appeared, a representative from Earth's government. The image was grainy, but the message was clear. "Dr. Carson, we've been monitoring the battle," the official said, their voice full of pride. "You've done the impossible. Earth is safe, for now." Carson smiled, though it was a tired, bittersweet expression. "For now," she echoed. "But we've learned something today. We may be outnumbered, but we will never back down." The official nodded, a look of respect in their eyes. Humanity has earned the respect of the galaxy today. And this war isn't over, but we'll face it together. Dr. Carson looked out at the stars, knowing that the battle was just the beginning. But for now, humanity had won, and that victory would echo through the galaxy for years to come. The aftermath and the message sent across the stars. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, the warship drifted slowly through the void. It hull battered and scarred from the fierce fight. The Zorvan fleet had been thrown into chaos, their leadership shattered, and their forces scattered. The crew of the warship, though weary and bruised, had emerged victorious. But as they gazed out into the endless expanse of space, they knew the victory was only temporary. The Zorvans would return. Dr. Carson stood alone in the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the stars. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The universe was vast, and unknown dangers still lurked beyond the stars. A soft beep interrupted her thoughts. It was a communication signal from Earth. She walked briskly to the console and activated the screen. The face that appeared was one she had seen countless times, the face of General William Hart, the leader of Earth's military forces. "Captain Carson." Hart's voice came through, calm, but laden with the same weight that Carson felt. "We've received your report. You've given humanity a moment to breathe, but we need to prepare for what's coming next. The Zorvans will regroup, and when they return, they'll be stronger than ever." Carson nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. "We'll be ready, but they won't just return with more ships. They'll return with more knowledge about us. We've shown them that we're not to be underestimated, and they'll take that lesson to heart." Hart paused, his expression grave. "It's not just the Zorvans we're worried about anymore. There are other factions out there, alien civilizations watching us, waiting to see what we do next. The message you've sent has already spread across the galaxy. We've made a name for ourselves today." Carson turned away from the screen, her eyes scanning the dark expanse outside. "And that's exactly what worries me. We've fought and bled for this victory, but it's only the beginning. Our survival depends on our ability to stand together. The galaxy's eyes are on us now." Hart's voice was steady. "We'll stand with you, Carson. Earth won't back down, and we'll make sure the rest of the galaxy knows that humanity can't be conquered. We will defend our home. No one can take it from us." Carson smiled faintly at his words. "I know, but we can't rest on our laurels. The war isn't over, and we need to keep moving forward. The Zorvans won't be the last enemy we face, and we need to prepare for all of them." Hart nodded. "We're already organizing a coalition with the other species. Together, we'll be ready for whatever comes next. But first, let your crew rest. You've earned it." The screen flickered off, leaving Carson in silence once again. She felt the weight of the universe on her shoulders, but she knew that humanity would not fall. Not now, not ever. The crew of the warship was already hard at work, repairing their ship and tending to the wounded. The medics were busy, their hands steady as they worked to stabilize those who had been injured in the battle. Yet, there was a sense of hope among them. They had been part of something bigger than themselves, something that would go down in history. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Holt, one of her most trusted officers. He was holding a small data pad in his hand, his face grim. "What is it?" Carson asked, her eyes narrowing as she approached him. "We've received a new transmission from an unknown source. It's a message for humanity." Carson took the data pad and scanned the message. The words that appeared on the screen were simple but chilling. "To the humans of Earth, your victory will not go unnoticed. But do not mistake this for peace. The galaxy has been watching, and your rise will be met with resistance. You have made enemies today." Carson's stomach tightened as she read the message. The Zorvans weren't the only ones who had seen humanity's strength. There were others out there, and now they knew that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. "We've made our mark," Holt said softly. "But it seems that we've also painted a target on our backs." Carson turned back to the observation deck, her eyes scanning the stars once more. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity had just stepped into the spotlight. There would be no turning back now. "We've made enemies, Lieutenant," Carson said, her voice low. "But we've also made allies, and we've proven that humanity will never back down. No matter what the galaxy throws at us, we'll fight to survive. We'll fight for our future." As the warship continued its slow journey back toward Earth, the crew knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But they also knew one thing for certain: humanity would rise to meet them, and they would not fall. Not while they still had the will to fight. The warship, battered and bruised, drifted through the stars, a symbol of humanity's resilience and strength. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning, and humanity was ready for it.